Welcome to Europe Direct from Paris, the capital of the Europe-wide opposition to war in Iraq. President Chirac has assumed the role of champion of much of the world against an overpowerful America. Will Europe split apart? And is this the parting of the ways with the United States? Also coming up, why Spain has joined the pro-war coalition when its people are against the war. And New Europe pays the price of loyalty as the Poles see their soldiers fighting someone else's war. Here is a map of Europe's new divide. Britain is the only state with combat troops in Iraq, but many more are giving political or backup military support. Spain, Portugal, Italy, Denmark and the Netherlands. And all the East European states waiting to join the European Union, from Poland to Romania. All Europe's governments have let coalition forces fly through their airspace and use NATO bases. But France and Germany, champions of a common European foreign policy, still condemn what they say is an illegal war. Those two, with Belgium, broke the unity of NATO when they opposed alliance plans for defensive moves before the war. And they want to forge a European defence union as a counterweight to US power. Several others have avoided taking sides. And Turkey is in turmoil, torn between loyalty to the West and its interests as an Islamic nation and neighbour of Iraq. The dispute has the potential to change the map dramatically. The old Franco-German axis has reached out to make a triple alliance, for now at least, with Russia. Europe's three big continental powers in a joint stand against US global domination. I've come first to the headquarters of the newspaper Libération. Like virtually all the French media, it's against the war. Here's an example of a recent front page. The headline is about Saddam Hussein's call to the Arab nation for a jihad, a holy war. With me is the deputy editor of Libération, Patrick Sabatier. Patrick, your paper, like the French government, has chosen not to back your allies, Britain and the United States, but to oppose the war. Why?
It was felt that this war, if it had to be led within the confines of international law, the United Nations. Of course, the debate has always been about what France would do once the war would start. At the editorial meetings, there are obviously every day almost debates. Nobody wants to support Saddam Hussein's dictatorship. Many people think it's right to overthrow dictatorships, but others stick to the point that this war is wrong and shouldn't have started in the first place.
Is France ready to take the consequences of NATO falling apart?
Well, the French think that they didn't take the responsibility of splitting NATO, that it was the other way around, and that it's not NATO's business to get involved in, for instance, the Middle East.
Patrick Sabatier, thank you very much. French politicians of the left and right are mostly united in opposing the war. A debate in the National Assembly heard many voices of outrage against America and Britain. Their resort to war was called illegal and dangerous. But there are a few dissenting voices, including HERVÉ MARITON, a member of the majority group of Conservative deputies led by Jacques Chirac. Mr. Mariton, what are your central concerns about the stance that France has adopted and the consequences?
Well, I would express two concerns. First, where do we stand in the world? Do we still belong to what is usually called the Western world? Do we maintain and do we acknowledge our alliances within NATO and within all the frames that assemble democratic countries? The second concern would be about Europe. How will Europe be tomorrow? I fear that the stance that France has adopted so far will probably weaken our position in Europe. We are in a minority.
What's the state of public opinion in France?
A third of public opinion in France is in favor of Saddam Hussein. And I think that's not just in favor of Saddam Hussein, but it's a global anti-Western feeling, which is obviously widely spread in our country.
Do you think that relations between France and its allies, Britain and America, can be repaired?
I think the relations will probably recover on a short-term basis, technically speaking, so to say. We may take part in the rebuilding of Iraq, but on a long-term basis, obviously something has been broken. And a question is put to French society and to French politics. My fears are that the anti-Western feeling may carry strength it is a minority feeling so far, but if we do not argue about this, if we do not plead what we believe in, it may get a majority in our country.
Thank you very much. HERVÉ MARITON, one of the few dissenting voices here in France over the war in Iraq. One of the wonders about the mood among the French is that the leaders are now in tune with the ever-radical student movement. YASSIR FICHTALI is head of France's National Students' Union. He's French of Moroccan parents. YASSIR shares the belief of Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair that the Iraq war will set the pattern of world politics for a generation. Only he is hoping for a different outcome.
I
think Chirac's politics are mostly on the right track, which, by the way, is quite surprising, because French students didn't expect that he'd maintain his stance right to the end. They thought France would probably cave in. So I think his policy is quite surprising, but also just.
And where do you hope it will lead?
I hope that we'll be able to make the US understand, and especially George Bush, that the world can't be directed simply according to the will of one country. Because I think diplomacy and respect for countries and their opinions is extremely important. From my point of view, the United States shouldn't be the only ones deciding things in this world.
Among the other countries in Europe, Spain has perhaps delivered the biggest surprise. The Conservative Prime Minister, José María Aznar, has broken with Spain's tradition of following the lead from Paris and Berlin. Now Spain is counted among what Donald Rumsfeld called the countries of New Europe, backing America. But so far, he hasn't taken his own people with him.
Spanish anti-war protests have attracted young and old in large numbers. Demonstrators say protest in some form will continue every day until the war stops.
With bells and whistles and pots and pans, the sound is completely deafening. This is La Cacerolada, named after the casserole dish, a traditional Spanish protest.
The demonstrations aren't politically orchestrated. This was organised by actors, environmentalists and community organisations.
Here in Spain, we have had a dictatorship of Franco for 40 years. We suffered from a dictatorship like this, but we think it wouldn't have been a good idea to bomb Madrid or Barcelona to get rid of Franco.
No to war is everywhere. Restaurants printed on receipts. Even the newsstand man wears a badge. The newspapers are having a field day criticising the government.
The press has given the government a hard time on the war issue. In particular, El Mundo, which has shown its support for Aznar since the very beginning, is now against war. On their front page, they showed this week the photo of a girl, an Iraqi girl, with her foot blown off. And today, their leading story is on the death of 50 civilians.
Government ministers admit public opinion's unfavourable. One poll showed 90% against war, but say it's about preventing terrorism, a preemptive strike, something Spain advocated before America.
And we know that Saddam Hussein had contacts with terrorist groups. We know and we knew that he had weapons of mass destruction programs, and we knew that he had been violating the international legality for many, many years. So, I mean, what were we waiting for? Another September the 11th?
The governing Popular Party's tough stand has brought resignations, including Manuel Pimentel, former government minister.
This illegal war will have an important consequence because thousands of million people in the world see now Occident, States and Europe like dangerous enemies. They think now that we only speak without bombs. And this is dangerous. In the future, probably this kind of illegal war produce more international terrorism.
Picasso's Guernica has featured on protest banners, a nightmare vision of aerial bombing during the Spanish Civil War.
The National Museum calls Guernica the universal anti-war symbol of our times, showing the madness of settling disputes with force, not dialogue. Here in Spain, there's a peace foundation named after Guernica, yet many Spaniards feel today's government has forgotten its message.
As for Europe's Iraqi exiles, they feel torn between fear for their relatives and longing for liberation.
I hope the salvation comes from Spain's helping in getting rid of this corrupt regime.
Yet the pull of the peace movement is equally strong.
I was very much moved. I was always wanting to say, hey, look, I'm Iraqi, you know, but I never mentioned that. And I just kept walking and shouting slogans with them.
Andrew Burrows for Europe Direct with the anti-war demonstrators in Madrid.
The war in Iraq has shown that there's an important new player in the politics of Europe, Poland. The Poles are firmly part of the coalition to oust Saddam Hussein, and a small number of Polish soldiers have taken part in military action in southern Iraq. But among the Poles themselves, there are arguments and a clash of loyalties.
Polish troops headed for the Gulf, receiving a formal send-off from their president, Alexander Kwaśniewski. The president has pledged up to 200 troops to bolster the coalition to oust Saddam Hussein. That's the strongest support offered by any Eastern European country. The support for Washington comes as no surprise in a country with strong loyalty towards the United States. Trams with one of America's best-known brand names trundle past the palace built by Stalin. Poland remembers Washington's support in throwing off Soviet domination, and in the last 2 decades it has enthusiastically embraced American culture and lifestyle. And there are other ties too.
Everybody in Poland has somebody in the United States. We also remember the role the US played in our struggle against communism. We remember the support we got. We also remember the role the US played in paving the way to our NATO memberships. And we claimed all the time that we will be a good ally, reliable ally, for good and bad weather. Now the weather is stormy and we are on.
But many Poles feel that with the war in Iraq, America is asking too much, even of a loyal ally. There have been regular protests in the past weeks, denouncing President Bush and US foreign policy. The demonstrators believe it's time for Poland to adopt a more independent foreign policy and that there's no justification for the war against Iraq.
We think that it's the war only for economic position of American oil companies and for geopolitical position of American states. And because of this, probably thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people will be dead. So we think we have to be very, very strongly against this war.
The protesters' anger has been aimed at Washington's European coalition partners, as well as at the American government. The deep divisions in Europe over the war in Iraq has forced Poland to choose between some of its most important and powerful allies.
I do hope that we can reconcile two loyalties to our European partners and also to the United States. I hope that we will not be confronted with a difficult choice, which could be compared to the choice a child is sometimes confronted with. Do you love more daddy or mummy?
Young Poles are well aware of the choices facing them. At a popular jazz bar in Warsaw, no one disputes Poland's affection for the United States. But opinion is divided over the war.
I think that the war it should happen. It's really important to end the regime of Saddam Hussein.
No, it's crazy for me because they will kill a lot of people.
For a different generation of Poles, there are other moral considerations. Beneath the symbols of Poland's military past, a Warsaw congregation celebrates Sunday Mass. This is a strongly Catholic country, and there's great identification with the Polish-born Pope. His caution against an attack on Iraq has had a big impact on young and old alike. The Polish people face a difficult choice between their strongest moral authority on the one hand and their most reliable political and military ally on the other. For BBC Europe Direct, this is Terry Shakinovsky in Warsaw.
So the disputes over the Iraq war have divided the countries of Europe into two camps. Old antagonisms have burst out again. With me in London is Lord Durrendorff, a German-born scholar and politician who's made his home in London for many years. I want to ask you, do you believe we're seeing a return to the balance of power politics of the past?
No, it's not balance of power politics. It's falling apart. falling apart of European countries with different traditions, with different views of things, because there aren't any powers which are playing the others into a game to show who is strongest or who is in charge. It is actually an expression of quite deep differences of view, differences not only of views of the United States, but of the role of the nation state. The post-communist countries feel that the nation state protects them against power, actually, in this case against the Soviet Union, or the memories are still fresh. And the same is true for Spain. And so you get an alliance of the nation states against the federalists, if that's the way you want to put it, which is very different from balance of power games.
So where do you think it leads?
Well, it certainly leads to opening the conflicts which have always existed within Europe. Make no mistake, there's never been a European foreign policy. And what Europe there has always been under the umbrella of the United States military protection. And now we see that when things get serious, Europeans have very different views. They can agree on minor matters and on matters in the immediate neighborhood. And in Germany, people like this situation. In other countries, perhaps they don't.
But surely France, with Germany and Russia, are determined to stand up to America.
It is about the fact that in recent years, Europeans have begun to define themselves by contradistinction to America. Even the euro was often described as Europe's response to the dollar and keeping the dollar in check. And this new definition, which I regret profoundly, and which is not at all my view of things, is very widespread. And so it is almost natural that it should be expressed here too. But America is simply more visible as an actor on the international scene. It always was an actor.
So do you believe that a Europe that tries to stand up against America as a rival pole of power in the world, it's doomed to fail?
I hope so, and I definitely think so.
Lord Durrendorf, thank you very much. Back here in France, the role that Britain's playing as America's close ally in the war threatens to shatter the positive image that Tony Blair's had among many ordinary French people. Chris Bachman has been back to the village near the Pyrenees, where Tony Blair likes to go on holiday to find out if anything at all is left of the Prime Minister's special entente with the local people there.
This corner of southwest France between Toulouse and the Pyrenean Mountains is just about as far away from the politics of Paris as you can get. But locals in Saint-Martin-d'Oyde, once proud that Mr. Blair opened their tourist office a few years ago, are now disappointed in their most famous visitor. A local mayor says the British leader can no longer expect warmth from his French hosts.
I'm not sure the British Prime Minister would be received with honour by the people who live in this neighbourhood.
In the nearby local market town of Pamiers in the foothills of the Pyrenees, it's difficult to find anyone who's prepared to defend the actions of the man who's patronised their shops and businesses.
I think it's appalling. I think what they're doing is wrong because they're attacking civilians and not military bases. And I think this war could have grave consequences for the future.
I'm against war as a matter of principle. When anyone goes to war, it's hideous. Everyone's faced the consequences of war, yet we continue to wage war. At some point, we have to say, enough.
Why are local feelings running so high against the war here? Well, maybe because this region knows a lot about the consequences of conflict. The older generation still remember the Nazi occupation vividly. Tens of thousands of Spaniards fled here after Franco came to power just over the border. And more recently, French expatriates were resettled here after Algeria's War of Independence. When Tony Blair is here, he comes to this Catholic church to pray. Now the war he's waging is very much in the prayers of the congregation. And the priest says his worshippers, concerned about the way the war is going, have a message for Tony Blair if he dares to return this summer.
My message will be one of hope and peace, and also that he thinks of the children and the towns being bombed, and questions if the solution being pursued now is the only one.
And Tony Blair is one of quite a few leaders in Europe and beyond whose future could depend on the outcome of the war in Iraq. That's it for Europe Direct from now. From me, William Horsley in Paris, and the rest of the team, goodbye.
Good morning. Nice day yesterday, wasn't it? Or is that being overgeneral? Well, I think it is really, because unfortunately we didn't all enjoy highs of 19 degrees like Leon Solent, or almost 12 hours of sunshine in Anglesey. You can see the high pressure